Mrs. Johnson quickly noticed something was off about her horse, Daisy. She acted different than usual, restless and uneasy. Mrs. Johnson had seen this behavior before, but only with laboring horses, which was strange as Daisy never showed any signs of being pregnant. But as Daisy's behavior only got worse, it became clear she was in fact in labor. Everyone was shocked when the foal was finally born, but not for the reason you might think. But around her was complete silence. Everyone looked at the foal in complete shock. No one expected it to look like this, but what was going on with Daisy's foal? Why was the veterinarian acting so strangely, and how did Daisy get pregnant in the first place? But before we start our story, smash the like button, make sure to subscribe, and hit the notifications bell so you won't miss any new story. In a small town nestled deep in the countryside, there was a humble farm owned by the Johnson family. When the Johnson family had been running their farm for generations, and they were known in the community for their love and care for their animals, particularly for their prized mare Daisy. Daisy was a beautiful black horse with a gentle character, and she was adored by everyone in the town. She had never been used for breeding, as the Johnsons primarily kept her as a companion animal, so it came as a great surprise one spring morning when they noticed Daisy acting strange. She was pacing back and forth in her stall, whinnying and stomping her hooves on the ground, showing clear signs of distress. Mrs. Johnson, an experienced horsewoman, had seen this behavior before and suspected that Daisy might be in labor, which was very unusual as she hadn't shown any signs of being pregnant. The Johnsons immediately called the local veterinarian, Dr. Thompson, who rushed to the farm as fast as he could. He had been the Johnsons' trusted vet for many years, and he knew Daisy well. When he arrived, he was greeted by an anxious Mr. Johnson, who led him to Daisy's stall. Dr. Thompson arrived at Daisy's stall and quickly assessed her condition. He could tell she was in labor and that the foal's arrival was imminent. Mrs. Johnson was baffled. No stallion had been in the same stall or even the same meadow as Daisy, so how could she have fallen pregnant? But she soon realized that was the least of her problems, because Daisy was about to give birth, and she needed all the help she could get. Luckily, Dr. Thompson had brought all the necessary equipment and prepared everything for when he had to use them. But first, Daisy had to try on her own. Dr. Thompson stated Daisy was only in the first stage of her laboring process. It could take a few hours, up to a day, for active labor to start, so all they could do was wait. But Mrs. Johnson wasn't one to sit still. She had to know who impregnated Daisy. Maybe that could tell her more about the foal. They had hung cameras around the farm after another incident that took place many years before, so all Mrs. Johnson had to do was watch back the footage. And so she did. She scanned through the footage, roughly back to where Daisy was supposedly impregnated. It wasn't long before Mrs. Johnson noticed something very strange. As she reviewed the footage, Mrs. Johnson's eyes widened in shock. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. On the night Daisy had supposedly been impregnated, she had been alone in her stall. But she saw something extraordinary on the video. Someone opened the gate, and a stallion walked in. Mrs. Johnson immediately knew this was a premeditated act. But who would do something like this, and why? What were they getting out of it? She called her husband and Dr. Thompson, and they gathered around the computer screen to watch the baffling footage together. But then she suddenly recognized the stallion. It was their neighbor's stallion, Rocky. Mrs. Johnson had noticed Rocky acting strangely a few weeks before, but she had never imagined he would be the culprit behind Daisy's pregnancy. But when she looked closer, she noticed a woman had opened Daisy's stall for Rocky, which was strange, as Rocky's owner was a widowed man. This raised only more questions, but Mrs. Johnson had no time to dwell, as Dr. Thompson called her, saying Daisy was now in active labor. Mrs. Johnson quickly rushed back to Daisy's stall and saw her lying on the ground in distress. "It won't be long now," Dr. Thompson said with a smile on his face. You could see Daisy's abdominal muscles visibly contracting and relaxing, indicating she was experiencing strong rhythmic contractions. But Daisy didn't stay down on the ground. Instead, she rolled around, got up, paced around the stall, and lay down again. She looked very restless, but that would be over soon, or so they hoped. Daisy was breathing very heavily, and after she saw the house burst, Johnson worried about her precious horse. But Dr. Thompson assured her everything would be fine. Mrs. Johnson knew she had to trust her vet, but she couldn't ignore Daisy's behavior. Sweat dripped down the mare's face, and her eyes stood wide with concern. Even though Dr. Thompson was the veterinarian, Mrs. Johnson knew her horse through thick and thin. So when she got the feeling something wasn't right, she didn't just ignore it. She told Dr. Thompson again something was wrong, but his response stayed the same. That's when Mrs. Johnson knew she had to do something. She looked at her husband, and he could see his wife's worry. But what could they do? Dr. Thompson was at Daisy's side all the time. Then Mr. Johnson suddenly knew what he had to do. He took a few steps backward, though he knew something was behind him, and tripped on purpose. Getting Dr. Thompson's attention, Mrs. Johnson and Dr. Thompson gasped as they heard Mr. Johnson fall. He screamed in pain, but it didn't hurt that much. He exaggerated to get Dr. Thompson's attention, and it worked, because Dr. Thompson immediately rushed over to Mr. Johnson and helped him to his feet. But that wasn't enough. Mr. Johnson held his hand by his head and moaned in pain. "My head. It hurts. I have to lie down," he said sickly. "Dr. Thompson, can you help me inside?" Dr. Thompson, who stood by his side holding his arm, couldn't say no. He looked at Mrs. Johnson in an attempt for her to say, "I'll do it," but she stayed silent. "I'll be back in a second. Keep a close eye on Daisy, and don't get too close," Dr. Thompson said when he and Mr. Johnson stumbled away, but Mrs. Johnson wasn't going to listen. She knew what her horse needed, and that was a loving touch. So she carefully stepped inside Daisy's stall. Daisy's breathing immediately calmed down a bit when Mrs. Johnson placed her hands softly on her back. She stroked the horse's back and gently reassured her that everything would be all right. Mrs. Johnson then looked underneath Daisy's tail and could see her foal was almost due. But there was something wrong. Daisy had been in labor for a very long time, and the foal should have been here by now. Mrs. Johnson looked as Daisy tried to push, and finally realized what was going on. The foal lay breeched. This was very, very bad and wouldn't solve itself. They had to help Daisy, or else it could end badly for both of them. Dr. Thompson returned soon after, and Mrs. Johnson immediately explained what she had seen. The vet realized the seriousness of the situation and finally caved. He agreed with Mrs. Johnson. They had to help the foal get into a better position, and quickly, too. Every minute counted. He needed assistance. Dr. Thompson quickly called for additional veterinary assistance as the situation required immediate attention. Soon, a team of veterinarians arrived at the farm to assist in the complicated birth. Dr. Thompson and his team of veterinary specialists worked tirelessly, using all of their expertise and equipment to assist Daisy with her delivery. They carefully assessed the position of the foal and concurred it was presenting in a breech position, which meant that it was coming out with its behind first instead of head first. This was a complicated situation that required immediate attention, as it could lead to complications and endanger both Daisy and the foal. With focused precision, Dr. Thompson and his team carefully maneuvered the breech foal into the correct position for delivery. They worked with gentle but firm movements, ensuring that the foal's legs were positioned properly to minimize the risk of injury to Daisy or the foal. It was a delicate and challenging process that required quick thinking and skilled hands. Meanwhile, Mrs. Johnson helplessly watched from the sideline. She felt horrible seeing her beloved horse suffer. She knew pregnancy had its risks, but this was unlike any labor she had ever witnessed. A surge of resentment filled her for the person responsible. Unable to assist, she decided to confront her neighbor, Philip. Armed with the footage, she angrily knocked on his door. "What have you done to Daisy?" she demanded. Philip looked confused. "I have no idea what you're talking about," he said. Mrs. Johnson set her laptop down and pressed play. Philip, stunned by the footage, stared at the screen. After a moment, he exclaimed, "Wait, I know whose hand that is." Philip hesitated before revealing, "It's my daughter. I don't know why, but she put Rocky in Daisy's stall." Before Mrs. Johnson could question him further, Dr. Thompson called. Daisy was in critical condition. She rushed back to the farm, Philip following. "Where have you been?" Dr. Thompson asked. "Daisy's losing a lot of blood. The foal needs to come out immediately." The little hooves were already visible, but Daisy was exhausted. Dr. Thompson secured a special chain around the foal's hooves, gently pulling with each contraction. It was a tense moment. Sweat dripped from Dr. Thompson's forehead as he carefully helped Daisy. Finally, the foal emerged. Everyone sighed in relief, until they noticed the foal wasn't moving. Mrs. Johnson's heart sank as she watched Daisy lick the newborn. Minutes dragged by until, at last, the foal stirred, then tried to stand. But not everyone was smiling. Dr. Thompson looked pale. "That's not a regular foal," he said. Looking closer, Mrs. Johnson noticed the foal looked very different from Daisy and Rocky. Before Dr. Thompson could explain, a car pulled into the driveway. Philip's daughter Tilly arrived. Mrs. Johnson confronted her immediately. "You did this to my Daisy!" she yelled. "All right, calm down," Dr. Thompson said. "Who is this?" "I'm Tilly, Philip's daughter," she answered, sighing. "Yes, I did it, but I'm not proud. I needed money." Mrs. Johnson, furious, demanded, "And how would that help you?" Tilly looked down, nervous. "I had Rocky's DNA tested. He's a nabstrupper, a rare breed worth a lot of money. I figured if Daisy had his foal, I could sell it." She admitted it was a foolish plan and confessed she had checked on Daisy out of guilt. Mrs. Johnson, after a long pause, said, "I'm not going to report this, Tilly." Everyone was surprised. Mrs. Johnson continued, "It could have ended badly, but it didn't. But I am going to ask you to leave my property and never return," she added firmly. Tilly nodded, understanding the consequences of her actions. Without argument, she turned and left. Daisy and her foal made a full recovery. Mrs. Johnson named the foal Dorothy, meaning God's gift in Greek. She occasionally let Rocky graze with them, cherishing the bond they all shared. Mrs. Johnson never sold Daisy or Dorothy. Money was never her priority. They lived a long and happy life together.